The static, it don't stop. Not even when you turn the dial off. No. Let me start at the beginning, the way it happened. My name is Silas Corrigan. I'm 73 years old, and I live in a cabin at the mouth of Widow's Gap, up in the high country where the fog comes in thick as wool, and the birds don't sing much anymore. Haven't for years now. There was a time when you'd wake to their calling, but now there's just silence. Just the wind moving through the hollers. I suppose I should tell you about the radio, my brother's radio. But first you need to know about the Gap itself. Widow's Gap ain't on most maps. There's a holler that goes back about 6 miles, and the mountains form a narrow pass. Old stories say a woman named Mercy Holbrook took her own life there in 1847. Threw herself from the ridge during the dark of the moon. The mountains got her name after that. The name stuck. The thing about that place is, it's quiet. Too quiet. Not the good kind of quiet after fresh snow, when everything is peaceful. This is different. It's the kind of quiet that listens back at you. It has weight and intention. Old-timers used to say you could feel it pressing on your eardrums, like going deeper underwater with every step. There's something about that silence that makes you aware of every small sound you make. Every breath becomes loud. My brother Daniel moved out to Oregon back in 1968. Couldn't stand the mountains anymore. Said they were watching him. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I was younger then, maybe 35. Thought he was running from nothing but his own mind. But before he left, he made me promise I would keep the radio. He said it was important. He said I might need it someday. I didn't ask why. He left me the cabin and everything in it. Most of it was junk. Old quilts, yellowed newspapers, a wood stove that burned half the wood you fed it. But there was this one thing, a radio. Not like the radios they make now. This was old, a Philco from 1952. Had a wooden case the color of dark honey, weathered by time and hands. When you switched it on at night, the inside would glow with warm amber light, like a small fire being born in the machine. The vacuum tubes would bloom like little orange suns in the darkness, beautiful in a way that made you uncomfortable. The dial was ivory-colored bakelite, smooth from handling. From 600 to 1600 on the AM band, and then it curved down lower into the short wave. Below 1200 megahertz, where the stations thin out and the world starts to sound strange. I never paid it much mind for the first few years. It was just there, on the shelf next to the window, gathering dust like everything else. But loneliness has a way of making you reach for strange comforts. Loneliness whispers to you at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep, and it says, maybe there's something there. Maybe you're not as alone as you think. There's an old saying in these mountains. Folks used to whisper it when I was a boy, sitting on porches in the dusk. They said, quietly, like they were sharing a dangerous secret, don't tune the radio to the stations. Tune it to the static in between. That's where the ridge walkers keep their frequencies. I never believed in it. It was just the kind of thing old-timers said to keep the young ones from wandering the woods at night. Fear as a fence. But when you live alone in the high country for long enough, and the winter presses down on you like a stone, and you can see your own breath hanging in the air of your own home like ghosts, well, you start to believe in a lot of things. It was late October when this happened. The fog had come in 3 days before and hadn't lifted. It comes in thick here sometimes, especially in the gap. The moisture gets trapped between the ridges and it just settles, stays. You can't see more than 10 feet from your door. The world becomes just fog and dark shapes of trees, and everything beyond that might as well not exist. I had been sitting by the stove drinking cold coffee from a tin cup. The coffee had been hot 12 hours before. Now it had that bitter, over-steeped taste that coats your tongue. I was watching the fog press against the window, seeing the way it moved like something alive, breathing in and out. The floorboards of that old cabin creak in a particular way when the humidity gets high. They were creaking that evening, soft, regular, like the cabin itself was breathing too. I reached over and switched on the radio. The tubes took a moment to warm up. There was a low hum, a kind of electrical whisper, as the filaments heated. Then that gentle orange glow filled the space beside my chair, like a small fire being born. The speaker crackled with static, just white noise, the sound you hear when nothing is there, when everything is there, depending on how you look at it. I turned the dial slowly, moving across the frequencies where stations should have been. But that night, there was only static. Each turn of the knob brought a different texture of it, rushing, whispering, crackling like a fire that hadn't quite caught. I kept turning, down, down, past the commercial stations, down into the short wave where the dial got smaller, where the frequencies got stranger. And that's when I heard it, a voice, coming through the static like someone calling from very far away, like someone calling from under the earth. It was tinny, old, like it was coming through a telephone line that had been buried in the ground for decades. A man's voice, saying something about the general store in Widder's Gap needing supplies, flour, sugar, salt for the winter stores. The voice was ancient. It crackled and hissed between the words, and underneath it I could hear other sounds. The creak of wooden shells, the tap of fingers on a wooden counter, the smell. God help me, I could almost smell it. Wood smoke and dust, and something like lye soap. Something warm and old and human. I knew that voice. It was old Tom Hartley, who ran the store in the Gap back in the 1920s. He died before I was born. Died in the fire. The store burned in 1924, and Tom with it. That's what the stories say. But there he was, on the radio, talking about inventory, about how the snow was coming early that year, about how the ridge walkers had been seen on the high passes more than usual. His voice was calm, the way folks speak when they're used to the strangeness of things. I turned the dial a fraction more, and the signal got clearer, stronger. Then I heard other voices. A woman, a child, more people in that store, talking about the winter stores, about whether the pass would be closed, about staying safe during the dark months, about keeping lights burning and doors locked. The radio crackled and hissed, but underneath it all, I could hear them having a conversation in a store that had been nothing but ash and memory for over 50 years. My hand was shaking on the dial. I was thinking about switching it off. I really was. I knew I should. But you know how it is when you find something that shouldn't exist. When you find something that makes no sense at all. You can't just let it go. I leaned forward. The chair creaked under my weight. The voices on the radio stopped. For a long moment, there was only static. Then, one of the voices, the woman's voice, she said something that made my blood go cold as mountain wind in January. She said, "Did you hear that? Someone's listening. Someone turned the dial toward us." I switched the radio off. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. I set it down carefully on the shelf. The cabin was dark. The stove had burned down to almost nothing, just the faint heat of cooling coals. I sat in that darkness, and I listened. I listened to the wind moving through the branches outside. I listened to the creak of the cabin settling around me. I listened to my own heartbeat, loud in my ears like a drum in a room too small. Then I heard it, slow, methodical, The sound of footsteps on the porch outside. Not many footsteps, just one. One pair of feet walking back and forth, pacing, like someone was thinking about something, or like someone was waiting for me to turn the light back on, waiting for me to come outside. The footsteps were measured and patient. I didn't turn the light back on. I sat in that darkness for a long time. The fog pressed against the windows. It seemed darker now, thicker, like it wasn't just fog anymore, but something else. Something that had weight and intention. Something that wanted to get inside. After a while, I don't know how long, the footsteps stopped. The porch went silent, but I could hear something else. A sound like the radio, but coming from outside, from somewhere beyond the windows, out in the fog. A soft static sound, like the white noise you hear when you tune between stations. But this wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the tree line, from the ridge beyond my cabin. It was the sound of the static itself made solid, made real. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was something else. Something I didn't have a choice in. But I reached over and turned the radio back on. The tubes glowed orange in the darkness, and the static came back. And now the static outside and the static from the radio seemed to be talking to each other, calling back and forth, like they recognized each other. The voices came back, but they were different this time. They were describing my cabin, every detail, the exact room I was sitting in. They described a cold cup of coffee next to my chair. They described the way the orange light from the radio tubes reflected in the dark window. They describe me, sitting, listening, afraid. They describe my face, my exact expression, and they described what I did next, before I did it, before I even knew I was going to do it. One voice said, "He's going to get up now. He's going to move to the window. He's afraid, but he's still going to look. He has to know." And I did. I got up. My legs were stiff. I walked to the window, and I looked out into the fog. The static from outside got louder, clearer, and for just a moment, just a sliver of a moment, I saw something in that fog. Movement, shapes, figures walking through the white, moving between the trees like they knew exactly where they were going. walking toward the cabin. They were tall, and they moved with a gait that wasn't quite right. Their heads were tilted, like they were listening, like they were tracking something, like they could hear my heartbeat from where they stood. I pulled the curtain shut. I don't remember much after that. There's a blank space, like something was stolen from that night. The radio was still on in the morning. The tubes were dead. All of them burned out at once. The dial was turned all the way to the bottom, to a frequency that doesn't exist on any radio I've ever seen. The number was too low. It went into numbers that shouldn't be there. The fog lifted the next day. The birds came back, mostly. But every night now, when the dark comes and the wind moves through the gap, I can still hear it. That static sound, coming from somewhere in the high country, coming from the ridge beyond the trees. It sounds like it's waiting, like it's patient, like it knows I'm listening, and it doesn't mind. And sometimes, when I turn on the radio at night, yes, I turned it back on, I don't know why, I can hear voices again. Not the voice of Tom Hartley anymore. Newer voices. Recent voices. People whose names I don't know. People talking about the winter coming. About what lives in the mountains when the lights go out. About how long before the gap claims someone else. They always seem to be waiting for something, waiting for someone to listen, waiting for someone to tune the dial between the stations into the frequencies that don't belong to any living place. I never did fix that radio. It sits there on the shelf, dark now, the tubes cold. But I can still hear it sometimes, especially on nights when the fog rolls in thick and the silence gets too heavy, and the mountains press down on you like they're trying to keep something in. Or maybe they're trying to keep something out. In the towns below, they don't talk much about the gap anymore. They've got their reasons. Some places in the mountains are better left alone. Some places in the dark, when the wind moves just right, some places are already listening, have been listening, will keep on listening, long after all of us are gone, and the mountains have forgotten our names. That static in the space between stations, that ain't empty space. That's where they wait. That's where they've always waited. That's where they'll keep waiting, patient as stone, until someone else turns the dial, until someone else reaches out in the darkness and find something reaching back. And every night, when I hear the wind moving through the branches and the fog pressing against my cabin walls, I wonder, are they getting closer? Or have they always been this close? Have they been here all along, just waiting for me to finally listen? Sometimes I wonder if I ever turned the radio off at all. Did you hear the static tonight? If this story made you feel like someone or something was listening from just beyond the edge of the darkness, you're not alone. Thousands of listeners have reported strange occurrences after tuning into the frequencies of Widow's Gap. Unexplained static on their radios, footsteps that shouldn't be there, voices describing things they were about to do before they did them. What unnerved you most about Case File 066? Was it the radio, the footsteps on the porch, the realization that Silas might never have turned it off? Comment below. Tell us your experience. Have you ever heard something on the radio that couldn't be explained? Have you felt watched in the mountains? Have you tuned into something you shouldn't have? We're collecting testimonies from listeners who've experienced phenomena similar to what Silas encountered. Your story matters. Your experience matters. And if you made it this far into the darkness with us, if you felt that static calling to you through your speakers, then you need to follow for more cases from the Redacted archives. Case File 067 is waiting. The Ashford Mirror. But only those who understand the danger should listen. Will you? Follow for Case File 067. Comment with your story. Some frequencies are better left untuned. But you already knew that, didn't you? We'll be listening for your response.